Hi, this is Chris Smith with Local Joe's. At Local Joe's, we help local business. Hi, this is Chris Smith with Local Joe's.
This is City Pulse Newsmakers, a weekly look at the issues and the people behind them in Greater Lansing. Brought to you by City Pulse, Lansing's weekly alternative newspaper. And now, here's your host, City Pulse publisher, Burl Schwartz.
Good morning. Our topic today is the City of Lansing's long-term debt. But if you think that's boring, wait, because it's really at the root of a much sexier topic, which is whether to sell the city's prized public utility, the Lansing Board of Water and Light. And if that's not enough for you, we've got the most interesting mayor this side of Rob Ford, Lansing's own Verge Bernero. Welcome back.
Thank you. Always a pleasure.
And with him is the money man from the mayor's financial health team, an expert on state and local finances from Michigan State University, Dr. Eric Scorsoni. Welcome to the show.
Thank you.
And also with us is the always interesting columnist from City Pulse and associate publisher Mickey Hurton.
Good morning. You're right. Yeah. You ain't seen nothing yet. Start up.
All right, Your Honor, how serious is the city's long-term debt?
Well, I'm glad that Dr. Scorsone is here from Michigan State to talk about some of that, the particulars. But as you know, we asked the financial health team, we assembled the financial health team to get at that very question. When I became mayor and living through 2008, it's hard to believe it's been 10 years since I became mayor, but we've been through some very difficult financial times. And the bulk of my energies have been spent on the short-term financial challenges facing the city. In the long run, I knew we had some unfunded liabilities, long-term liabilities for pension and health care. But I frankly didn't have time to focus on that initially. It's sort of like putting out a fire. And we had a fire right in the house, and we didn't have time to worry about the fire that was coming up, I guess the brush fire that might be coming up the way. So the good news is that our short-term financial position is in much better shape. We're, instead of borrowing from the rainy day fund and trying to keep afloat and making cuts, we now have stabilized the budget. We're down from 1,200 employees to 850, but we've stabilized things. We're now putting money back into the rainy day fund, slowly building that up and making some strategic investments in the city. The long-term debt is the thing I'm trying to frankly get my hands around and get my head around. And I've asked the financial health team, of which Dr. Scorsone is a key part, a key member, to help me evaluate that. We understand that it's about $600 million in unfunded long-term liability, pension, and healthcare debt, or liabilities that we face. And I'm trying to understand, what does that mean? It's been described as a ticking time bomb, but I don't know when the bomb potentially goes off. Just this week, Burl, we see Wayne County getting an emergency manager from the governor. They were on the watch list for Treasury. We know that we've seen cities fall: Benton Harbor, Flint, Pontiac, Detroit. So we know this is not an esoteric debate. This is not an academic debate. That, in fact, cities in Michigan are still in jeopardy and are facing severe challenges. And we in Lansing face a severe challenge. So I've asked the FHT to better quantify that, both in terms of the number and in terms of the date, and then set some goals, some targets for when should we be, how should we be, give us some options for how we should be addressing that. That led us to looking at our assets, all of our assets, looking at all of our liabilities, looking at all of our assets. One of those assets, as you mentioned in the intro, is the Board of Water and Light. And I've simply asked that we take a good look at that. What is it worth? What are the liabilities facing the board? What is it as an asset? If we were to determine, and it would be a long, tedious, drawn out, and transparent process if we were to look at selling the board, but what is it worth and what could it mean to the city?
All right. Now, some people say, we don't buy it, we don't think there's any real risk of going bankrupt. One of those people who says that is Carol Wood, who was on the show last week. Let's listen to that right now.
There's been a lot of rhetoric
about the fact that the city is going bankrupt. Again, I talked about it just a few minutes ago, and the fact that I'm not sure how you're going to entice people to come to Lansing if you keep throwing out there that we're going to be going bankrupt. I don't believe we're at that situation that the mayor has been spewing that information. Third, I sit on both the Police and Fire Retirement Board and the Employees Retirement Board. We have done a great job in the time that I have been on those boards to make changes within the retirement system to make sure that we are receiving more money for our returns on investments. And when we have asked our money managers and our actuarial companies to tell us where we are across the state and across the nation, we are in the higher percentile than other public municipalities.
She then goes on, by the way, to say you ought to show up more often for those board meetings. Your reaction?
Can we get? I'd like to hear Eric's view on this, because
Sure.
the mayor talked about a time bomb going off, and in your perspective, are you able to? Can you talk about how grave the situation is, and when we face a potential bankruptcy, if that's the end case?
Well, it's tough to say when there'd be a bankruptcy because that's very conditional on a lot of things. The fact is our most recent analysis is that Lansing has the largest unfunded liability of any city in Michigan.
Right.
And the reason for that is because Flint has reduced its liability because of the emergency manager, and Detroit did through the bankruptcy. So Lansing's actually now the largest unfunded liability of any city. And it's a real challenge. I mean, it may be 5 years, it may be 10 years. It's very hard to predict right now. We'll try and do that if we can, but we're talking hundreds of millions of dollars. And you know, the reality is those are promises that you have to pay. And the only way you're going to do it is to raise taxes, cut spending that you have today, or find something else, which would be changes in the benefit structure. I would agree the pensions are decently funded in Lansing, but the retiree health care is really not funded at all, essentially.
Meaning we pay for that every year out of the city budget?
Right. I mean, years ago, Lansing would have been able to take this money and pay for road repairs. It's not going to go there anymore. We're talking $20–30 million going out of the general fund budget into retiree health care premiums, into pension payments. The fact that she says Lansing is, you know, a well-funded system, I wouldn't disagree necessarily, but keep in mind that's not such a great statement when you think of nationally. We have huge problems in government pensions. We have $1 trillion underfunded problem. So, and then there's a lot of assumptions that they use that maybe some people would question. So it's a big problem. It's not just Lansing, but I think Lansing, unfortunately now, because of the emergency managers and their actions in other cities, is really close to the top now.
So I find it's hilarious to hear Carol Wood talking about that I'm being negative. That is rich. That is truly rich. I have been, I think anybody would say, a real cheerleader for Lansing, and I remain a cheerleader for Lansing. I love this city. I think we have incredible potential. I think we will become one of the great Midwestern capital cities. I think we're on our way. But in the introduction to the answer to your first question, I talked about the short term versus the long term. And I have really focused on the short term, getting our budget in shape. And of course, I've shouted from the highest mountain that Lansing is a great place to invest. And I think we've been successful in getting all sorts of investment. The record shows hundreds of millions of dollars in investment, including General Motors doubling down on their investment here. The insurance companies, Neogen, Niowave, I mean, high-tech companies, you name it. We got all sorts of investments taking place. So obviously, I haven't been screaming about we're going bankrupt. However, I also am not going to, as a leader, taking an oath to the citizens of Lansing, I am not going to bury my head in the sand and say everything's hunky-dory and ignore the realities that Professor Scarsone is talking about. That now that Detroit and Flint have addressed their problems, however wrenching a process it was, we now have moved up from third place to first in terms of our long-term unsustainability of our pension and health care liabilities. And so, you know, I'm not going to sit there in la-la land with Carol and Jody and some of the others on the council and pretend that it doesn't exist. I'm not going to do it. Now, the IBEW over at the Board of Water and Light, IBEW 352, they might want me to do that, to pretend it doesn't exist. I'm not going to do it. I think the oath I took means that I got to be honest and upfront about the challenges that we face. Now, am I going to shout from the highest mountain? I don't really want to, but the fact is, if we ignore it, it will get known, okay? People are going to find out about it. The Treasury Department is going to come knocking. It's not like if we don't talk about it, it won't exist. It's far better for us, I think, to address it in a forthright manner, get the best minds around it, and for Carol and Jody to act like they don't know anything about it. I saw them quoted in the paper saying, we never heard anything about it. We've been meeting with Dr. Scarsone and others from the FHT. We've been getting briefings. So, this is, somehow they've got a little amnesia about the presentations that we've been getting. They should be well aware that these things are not fully funded, that they do have to be addressed. The bell, is ringing, and it tolls for thee. And we need to answer the call and step up and work with the FHT, work with the best minds, work with the unions, work with the community to say this is real. And if you don't want to go the way of Detroit or Flint, again, I'm not here, I don't want to be Chicken Little saying the sky is falling, but I also don't want to ignore the realities. These communities right around us have been very severely impacted, and it can happen here too.
How are you addressing it, though? Because right now you have union contracts, and I presume that we are still getting in a deeper hole, that these contracts in place are what causes the problem. How are you going to address that?
Well, I'm interested in Dr. Scarsone's opinion of that. I feel that we have gone a long way, that our unions have cooperated with us.
But far enough?
That we've made real progress. So
Right.
I think we'll stand up to communities anywhere in terms of the tweaks that have been made, so that we've actually lowered the problem. We've lowered the liability. But of course, we haven't eliminated it because it took years to build
Right.
it up. And so we're not going to, in one fell swoop, in one round at the negotiating table, be able to get to ground zero. So again, that's why I've called on experts, and
Yeah.
I've invited the unions, by the way, to join us at the FHT table to come in and help us grapple with the problem, understand the numbers. First of all, let's get to a point where we all understand. We're all singing from the same hymnal, at least about the numbers, what the math says. Let's agree on the math and then get to a solution. But I feel the unions, in fact, have given some more than others.
Right.
The UAW and the Teamsters, I think more so, have been there. The uniform personnel, probably less so. But we all have to work on it together.
I mean, my question is it getting worse or better? Or, I mean, is the boat still leaking? Or have we patched the boat and now we can deal with the larger issues? What's your view of that?
The unions and the mayor's team have made some changes that have helped, but the leak is still there. And so you're right. I mean, the basic challenge is more is going to have to be done. And I want to make this key point. A lot of this is people that are already retired. So this is, I think it's almost 2-to-1 now, 2 retirees per employee.
Right.
That's what we call a super mature system. And Detroit, for example, was 3-to-1. So I think the reality is the unions, and retirees are not represented by the unions.
Sure.
So that's a different issue, and I think that's going to be one of the challenges. You can do a lot with the unions, but you still have
Good point,
a lot of other issues to deal with.
And folks at home can think about this. Depending on their age, they might see it a different way. But everybody has a father, a mother, maybe a grandfather or grandfather. Maybe they have a pension of some kind. These workers, we're not talking about people with big fat paychecks. These are not Wall Street 1%ers. These are people who worked hard for the city, who maybe accepted less pay, less compensation, knowing that they had a pension. And these pensions are generally modest. Just like when you heard about some of the pensions from the folks that have been on the system for a long time in Detroit. They were modest pensions. And so when you talk about a haircut, of 10%, it's significant when they're banking on this amount. So we certainly we strive to honor those promises that were made, both in healthcare and in pay. We don't want to pull the rug out from underneath somebody in their golden years to go back and say, whatever sacrifices you made, you gave to the city, and here's our thank you, get lost. That obviously would be an absolute last resort. If I couldn't answer a 911 call, if it gets to that point, then I have to look at just pulling the rug. But we'd like to, as much as possible, again, work with the unions, even though they don't technically represent the retirees. These are their retirees. I know they still care about them. We care about them. That's why they're called legacy costs. They're our legacy. These are folks that helped build the city, and we don't want to see them just thrown away. That's all the more reason why I think this attitude by some of the council members of bury your head in the sand, denial, is not helpful.
Or appealing to the popular belief.
But we're the luckiest city in the state because we have something you could actually get rid of. You could get rid of BWL, which is not a key function. There's nothing that says a city has to provide electricity or that even does it particularly well. And have an asset that can deal with this. Imagine our situation if all you could do is just hope that it was going to get better and do it out of current revenues or borrowing or some other function.
Well, let me ask Dr. Scarsone this now. The financial health team presumably is going to start an in-depth study of this question of whether to sell the Board of Water or whether to recommend it. What if the conclusion is bad idea? Then what do we do?
Well, and then, yeah, I have no idea what we'll conclude, so I'm going to be very clear about that. It's a very complex issue. I think, what you look at Chicago is doing, for example, and they're not going through bankruptcy, is using the Affordable Care Act, basically to say we can provide retiree health care in different ways than we used to. The Affordable Care Act provides you new options. That's what Wayne County and Detroit will likely do. Detroit is doing, Wayne County will likely do. Is you have the individual insurance market now more affordable, essentially. So rather than the city being the one paying for the insurance, the city provides like a stipend and health care is provided. I mean, I'm not saying that's what's going to happen. I'm saying there are options we have to look at. So the mayor's absolutely right. People have essentially deferred compensation. They worked for the city government in a sense for less money than they would have probably worked for in the private sector. And I respect that, and I think that's important to keep in mind here. I think what we're doing is similar to what other communities are doing. Saginaw County has a group like this. They're all retirees. Unions are all meeting to say, how do we deal with retiree health care? It's a lot of communities around the state. And we've looked to the state to see if they would do anything, and quite frankly, at this point, we haven't seen much. So the cities have to, try and do what they can.
Your Honor, when this idea of considering the sale of BWL came up, you were adamantly opposed to even studying the idea. What changed your mind?
I think, like a lot of people, there's nostalgia and there's warmth and just a genuine, support for the board. Having come to Lansing 30 years ago, the board. My experience with the Board of Water and Light is very positive, and it wasn't just a faceless corporation. This was a Lansing thing, and we used to trade in our light bulbs. I don't know if you were here at that point, Mickey, but we used to be able to take I was here, and we would save our burnt out bulbs and trade them in and get new ones. I mean, you can't do that at too many companies. So look, there's a lot, and the service has been great, and it still is today. So, when I defended the board through the ice storm and all that, I still stand by that. They're a great service. They're good people, by and large, very good people, qualified, doing good work. So my natural inclination was no. I mean, this is like apple pie. And I just didn't see the need. I thought it was draconian to even consider it. But it was not a well thought out. It was not, an intellectual, data-based reaction. It was more of a visceral reaction. And so part of it in working with the financial health team, and then also seeing the cities around me fall by the wayside to an emergency manager, bankruptcy, things that were unthinkable. And then Kevin Orr came in and spoke, the former emergency manager for Detroit, and talked about, here we are moved up to, as Dr. Scarsone says, number one on the hit list now in terms of our liabilities. And if an emergency manager were to come in here, like a Kevin Orr, one of the first things they would do, kind of as Mickey alluded to, is they would look at, my God, you got this asset that's the Board of Water and Light, wholly owned by the citizens of Lansing, and that's one of the first places they would go to sell. And so rather than wait until we're on our last leg, I think it behooves us to look at our options today. And people have talked about different things, and again, it's premature. I want to let the study take its course, but people have talked about monetizing the board in one way or the other, and it's kind of over my head. We would need experts to look at that. Monetizing it, if you think about, I ask people to think about if, God forbid, one of your family members was gravely ill and they needed an operation and the insurance wasn't going to cover it, and you needed $60,000 or $80,000, and you had it in your house, you had the equity in your house, would you consider remortgaging your house if you could pull that equity out and pay for an emergent operator? Well, most of us would. Our house is our greatest investment. It's our greatest asset. So it could be that we could monetize an aspect. Again, I don't know. I'd defer to Dr. Scarsone and others. But it may be there are different options that cities are employing when they have these assets, if it makes sense. In Oakland County, which is known as the bedrock of financial solvency, in Oakland County, I believe they've actually bonded, borrowed money to pay some of this liability. Now, I'm not recommending that, but that's the point is, different municipalities are doing different things. They're looking at their assets and making strategic decisions to avoid bankruptcy. Now, I know Carol's worried that I'm saying that too much, that bankruptcy word. But the fact is, a stitch in time saves 9. The question is, what should we be doing? What steps can we be taking now, investments or strategic financial decisions, using the financial instruments that are out there to avoid bankruptcy or a haircut later, when it's too late, and at which point then you have to go to the retirees and whack people who have been counting on that money. I want to avoid that.
Mickey?
Well, I'm just saying, to me, the strategy is, you're right, the city's improving, things are better. I think addressing this sort of seems like, let's make a great city even greater. Let's avoid these problems. We're doing a great job, and we're going to make sure that we are more solvent, we have better amenities, we are reinvesting in our infrastructure, in our people, in our services. That's what you sell. And yeah, I mean, I think that's the way.
Well, Your Honor, let's talk a little bit about politics of this. You have now kind of torn the Band-Aid off this scab, and the timing is such that this could really be what people are voting on when and if you run again for mayor in a little over 2 years. You think that could shake down that way?
Well, I hope people know me well enough that they know I don't run with my finger in the wind on a daily basis or in an election. So I have been one that says my piece. I really try to do what I think is right and let the politics take care of itself. And so that's what I'll do.
The poll that the IBEW did, the basic question was without any information about your arguments, but even when they, and so 10 or 12% of the public said yes, we think we should sell it. Then when they asked the question with your arguments, you still didn't get more than 20%. That's quite an uphill battle. And you're going to be facing an election that may be coming not that long after this long-term study. Do you think you can make this case?
Well, it's not a case that I'm making. The case in terms of selling the board,
Right.
I can't say today that I'm for selling the Board of Water and Light.
Right.
What I can say is that I'm for studying all of our assets, including the board, and all of our liabilities, and making strategic decisions, early on to prevent bankruptcy. And to say otherwise, I mean, you're burying your head in the sand. We see all around us, Wayne County today is getting an emergency manager, and I'm trying to avoid that. I think my record is strong in terms of the economic solvency of the city, in terms of the short term, and the numbers will speak for themselves, and the FHT will speak for itself. The financial health team will make a recommendation, and that recommendation will be to the mayor and to the council and to the citizens of Lansing. And we'll take it from there. We'll see what that recommendation is. So the election is in 17. It's soon to be the fall of 15. There's plenty of time for that to work itself out. And if I run again, I think we will continue to be in strong shape. I think the city is growing. I think there's a lot of signs of progress, and I think that's the sort of thing people will be voting on.
The board of the Lansing Board of Water and Light now is doing its own study, and I wonder what your thoughts were about that.
Well, it remains to be seen what that study will be. I think they're passing a resolution Tuesday night, and I think my understanding is it'll be different than the one that was passed in Cow.
Which was essentially to prove that it shouldn't be sold.
Right. It
Yeah.
was asking for a one-sided study,
Yeah.
which I thought was ludicrous.
Did you know that committee of the whole resolution was coming up?
Did not.
Which is interesting because you get roundly criticized for pulling the strings of the board.
Yeah, you're not much of a puppet master,
I
are
may
you?
have finally convinced Mickey that I do not run the Board of Water and Light. So, because people did wonder, well, how did you know this, but you didn't know that? It's very haphazard. They do not work for me. We appoint them. I appoint them with the council's approval, and then they take an oath and they run the Board of Water and Light. And so
And
I
then,
may or may not.
then you take an oath at them, right?
But is it a good or bad thing for them to be studying it?
They don't have a vote. I mean, under the charter, they should be running the board. They're according to best practices, and they're responsible to the mayor and the council for best practices. The charter, if citizens read it, if they're interested in terms of selling the board, it lays out a process for selling the board. And it doesn't include the Board of Water and Light. I mean, it stands to reason. If the Board of Water and Light is our asset, it would be like your employees coming to you and saying, this is how we're going to run the City Pulse. You know,
I wish they would.
But let's be honest, though, this whole poll, and even with the Board of Water and Light and their resolution, is all political. It's a political shot across the bow of you, at you, and it is obviously has political intent. The union has worked with the Board of Water and Light members, had them to dinner, they've gone to ball games together, they've done all sorts of things. And the fact that they were willing to do this poll before they got roundly, criticized for such a gross abrogation of their fiduciary responsibility. I mean, clearly, this was a biased, politically driven initiative, and that's fine as long as you see it as that. I don't give it. I mean, I wrote this week in the City Pulse. I give it no credibility, and I don't think it was meant to be.
Here's the thing. You know that I'm a Democrat and I'm pro-union. I believe unions have a place. I believe in the union movement. I believe workers have rights and they should be heard and all of that. But I also have been a Democrat who's had to stand up to unions. I've had to stand up and I've had to work and ask them to make compromises and to make concessions. I couldn't give the unions everything they wanted. I can't today. I love them. I love the UAW. I love the Teamsters. I love the police and fire. I can't give them everything they want. That's part of the problem we have in some of these cities is that they were given too much.
Right.
And so as a leader, you got to stand up. And the Board of Water and Light commissioners need to learn that they will have to stand up to the union. It's okay to meet with them. It's okay to have lunch with them. You've got to be willing to stand up for the citizens of Lansing because you cannot afford to give the unions everything they want.
Now, have you given the financial health team its charge yet to begin the study?
I think I pretty much have, yeah.
Are you
Because
satisfied?
Hollister was waiting for a letter, right?
Yeah.
And did he get that?
We did, yes.
Okay.
All right,
cool.
so are you happy with the charge?
Yes, I think we agree. It's a fair assessment to look at all these options and see what we think from a fact-based perspective where the city needs to go forward.
And with, we only have about a minute to go, but what are the broad points under this charge?
Well, I think partly it's to look at the legacy costs, the retiree health care and pension system, and to really understand and make sure everyone else understands what are those challenges, what do those numbers look like, how are they going to impact the city down the road, how much money is going to be diverted to those things. And secondly, to look at all assets, which obviously the Board of Water and Light is a large one, and to understand how the balance sheet looks. And I would just point out, Lansing's balance sheet today is actually negative net assets. Now that's different. Municipal bankruptcy is quite different, so that it would not qualify by any means for bankruptcy, but it does have negative net assets today because of these long-term legacy costs.
Very good. Well, we're about out of time, but Your Honor, thanks very much.
Thanks so much. I want to get a quick thank you to MSU for loaning us so much of
Dr.
Dr. Scarsone's
Scarson,
time.
thank you so much for being here today, and Mickey Hurton, as always, almost always, it's a pleasure to have you here. Thanks so much. Thanks for watching, everybody. We'll be back next week. Have a great weekend.